workshop for November 19th, 2024. Can we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Yonker.
I am here.
Councilmember Hegestead.
Here.
Councilmember Hess is absent. Councilmember Guy. Here. Councilmember Hustis is absent. Vice Mayor Goodman.
Present.
Mayor Orsborn.
Present. Thank you very much. Item number 2 is a workshop. Items 2A is presentation and discussion regarding various Gila River projects and initiatives. And Adam Copeland, you're going to kick us off.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Adam Copeland, Deputy Director of Development Services. So excited for tonight. As you can see to my left, we have some guests here. They're going to help with the presentation tonight. We have Cindy Paddock. She's the ambassador for the Urban Waters Federal Partnership associated with the Rio Reimagine project that she'll be discussing some slides tonight. Maggie Sofel, who's to her left. She's the Senior Director for the University City Exchange, also supporting the Rio Reimagine initiative. We'll be talking a little bit later. And then Willie Summers, he's an invasive plant program coordinator, that's quite a title, with the Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management. So thank you, Willie, for showing up and providing us your guidance and education on the project. And then we also, no introduction needed, Bob Weiser will also be assisting in the presentation. So we'll talk a little about just a quick historical snapshot of the Gila River, just kind of from the city perspective where we're at today. I'll then turn it over to Maggie and Cindy to talk about the Rio Reimagine, some progress there, and then I'll be talking a little bit about the Lower Gila River collaborative effort that the West Valley has streamlined and organized over the last several years. Bob's going to talk a little bit about the 40-acre site, as well as Willie. He's going to talk about that as well, some of the progress that they've made with some grant funding through the state service. So with that, I'm going to kick off my portion. So many of you have seen this slide before over the years, but as you know, back in 2006 or so, the city and other West Valley communities, Goodyear, Avondale, as well as the Flood Control District of Maricopa County, established the El Rio Vision, which is really spearheading the West Valley and kind of putting us on the map. This particular vision was really focused around multi-use opportunities, bringing back the riparian habitat. Much of this area had a lot of water before the salt cedars inundated the river. Flood control was also high priority, restoring the river high priority, as well as just starting to establish partnerships, laying that ground level foundation and starting the conversation and bringing partners together. Again, this goes back well over 20 to almost 30 years when the conversation first started. So just a quick snapshot of that before we get into too much detail. Why it's important to Buckeye and the West Valley communities, as well as other communities along the corridor. You guys have seen many of the fires in the Gila River. They burn higher, hotter, longer than your native trees. They're very expensive to put out, so that's a major component that will be primarily mitigated as we start to restore the river. Water conservation, salt cedars are the sponges in the environment, so they do soak up a lot of water, and with restoration efforts, a significant amount of water savings will be realized as we start to make progress along the corridor. This is a picture, I thought it was kind of a wow factor. This is a picture in 1983 of a flood this is where the State Route 85 bridge crosses the Gila. So if you're going towards Gila Bend, the water almost overtopped that bridge. So it shows you during a significant storm event how much water can come through this corridor. So that's also a high level of focus for us. Habitat restoration, I've learned a lot about habitat restoration through this process. We actually have some endangered species that are in the river corridor. We include a lot of partners, Audubon, others, to ensure that we're doing the right thing as we start to restore. We also want to preserve the habitat that's there. And also bring back, and many of you probably don't talk about it much, but the aquatic habitat, bring back some of the aquatic habitat that was here historically over the last 100 to 500 years. That's also a focus that Buckeye was interested in over the last 20 years. And so what have we done, at least in the Buckeye side? We've adopted several projects and several guidelines, one being the El Rio Specific Area Plan. That's actually just south of the DSAP. So there's another area plan that connects the DSAP to the river that we worked on several years ago. We also have sand and gravel reclamation guidelines. We're probably one of the first cities that actually adopted something like that provides best practices for sand and gravel operators that come to the city. Bob and his group were key in El Rio design guidelines and El Rio trails. So a lot of the planning effort in Buckeye has been realized and completed, so we're ready to go. as development moves forward. We have all those plans in place. And then more importantly, the formation of the Lower Gila River Collaborative that I'll talk about a little bit more today. It's an organized group of folks that really organized our West Valley efforts and expanded our partnerships that we'll talk about a little bit later. And then the Rio Reimagine group that we're going to go into a lot of detail today. They're going to dive a little more into the historical component of what, how our history meets the history of the Rio Reimagine. They'll go into some more detail on how some of those overlap and support one another. But that's my quick introduction to the presentation today. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cindy and Maggie to go over the Rio Reimagine slides.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for having us here today. My name is Maggie Sofala. I am a Senior Director with Arizona State University's University City Exchange, and I'm joined by Cindy Patak, our Rio Reimagined Ambassador to the Urban Waters Federal Partnership Program. We're going to share with you a history, as Adam mentioned, about Rio Reimagined across the entire region here, and then specifically looking at the West Valley and the work that's been done with the Lower Gila River Collaborative. So very quickly, the Salt and Gila River Corridor has been used for time immemorial by the Akimel, Odom, and Pequash people to support their traditions, agriculture, and it remains an important resource, both culturally, religiously, and environmental resource for the people of the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community and the Gila River Indian community today. Fast forward many, many decades, and we sort of start the story of Rio Reimagined in the mid to late 60s with planning work that was done by an ASU architecture class in 1967. These students developed the first concept plan for the Rio Salado, looking at about 40 miles between the cities of Phoenix and Mesa, looking at a proposed development concept. And this master plan was designed to improve the region's environmental quality and economic vitality along the Salt River portion of our river corridor. And it was really the impetus for a lot of the planning work that followed corridor-wide. Over the next several decades, various master plans were developed across the corridor. Legislation was pursued to create funding mechanisms to implement a lot of these master plans along the river corridor. A plan for the same 40-mile stretch between the cities of Phoenix and Mesa was created in 1985 by something called the Rio Salado Development District that went before the voters countywide in 1987 and was vetoed. And so in 1999 in the West Valley here, we had Avondale, Buckeye, Goodyear, and Maricopa County came together as the El Rio Partnership to create the El Rio Vision, which encompassed 17 and a half miles to address flood risk, identify multi-use opportunities, and restore riparian habitat. And this effort produced several plans to implement the El Rio Vision, including the El Rio Watercourse Master Plan in 2006, the El Rio Design Guidelines in 2015, and a vegetation management plan by the Flood Control District in 2016. So here you can see some of the broader context. After a decade of implementing various pilot projects, doing foundational studies and master planning efforts, documenting vegetation management guidance, the El Rio Partnership transformed into this broader partnership that Adam mentioned, invested in the Lower Gila River, called the Lower Gila River Collaborative, or the LGRC. Today, the LGRC convenes the partners here in the West Valley to achieve ecological benefits and wildlife habitat restoration that also meets the needs of the communities here. And LGRC sits within the broader Rio Reimagined study area, as you can see on the map here, and really serves as the Rio Initiative's western reach. So since the early planning of the 60s and into the early 2000s, a lot of the cities and communities along the river corridor have pursued discrete projects and plans, from parks and trails to habitat restoration and flood management. But it was really the late Congressman Ed Pastor and late Senator John McCain that championed the idea of looking at the Salt and Gila River corridor at a regional scale and doing revitalization work on a regional scale. And in 2018, Senator McCain catalyzed the charge by convening the elected leadership along the river corridor to sign a non-binding statement of intent agreeing to work together to revitalize this river corridor, which included 6 cities, including Buckeye, 2 Native nations, Maricopa County, and the Salt River Project. And as part of this statement of intent, it was Arizona State University that was identified to be the facilitator and convener for the initiative, which is a role that we continue to serve in to this day. You can see in the photo here the original signatories of that 2018 statement of intent, including Mayor Jackie Meck, a Buckeye icon. So today, the Rio Reimagined is a shared visionary revitalization initiative spanning over 55 miles of the Salts and Gila River corridor. You can see on the map here the unofficial study area, which includes the communities 1 to 2 miles above the banks of the river channel. Conditions along the corridor are very diverse, from the more robust infrastructure in the East Valley, like Tempe Town Lake, and then moving west to the more natural conditions of Basin Meridian Wildlife Area, Tres Rios. There's also very diverse land ownership across this 55-mile corridor, from federal land managers to mining industry and agricultural uses. And the Rio Reimagined initiative at this regional scale really presents an opportunity to elevate the discrete planning efforts, the discrete project work across this corridor, and looking at it from a regional perspective and how to leverage our resources towards shared goals. Today, the Rio Reimagined partnership is very robust and diverse. This slide is only a very high-level snapshot of the different entities that participate in the partnership today. Includes our public agency partners, the federal, state, county, city, and tribal partners that really form the leadership backbone of the Rio Initiative. The private sector, nonprofit, and community-based organizations, their participation continues to grow to this day. This is a very small snapshot of all the organizations involved. ASU convenes these partners on a bi-monthly basis for partners to share the work that they're doing across the corridor, to bring in speakers from other watersheds to learn what others are doing across the country, and to share upcoming events and opportunities for volunteerism across the river corridor. This is just a very high-level timeline of the Rio Reimagined initiative. In 2018 was when we had that initial public launch with the signing of the statement of intent. And really, this initiative has been in a startup phase for 6 years because, as we know, these types of initiatives in other places across the country take decades to actualize. If you think about all the planning work and project work that's been done since the 60s, what it took to build Tempe Town Lake. So in the grand scheme of things, we are very much at the inception still to this day. When the initiative first launched, the Rio Reimagined partnership was formed at that time, and there was a very early intent to develop our relationships with our federal delegation, and there was no effort at that point to develop any sort of regional scale plan for the corridor. It was really based on building out the partnerships and building our relationships with the federal delegation. What that helped us to accomplish is in 2020, we received designation in the Urban Waters Federal Partnership Program, which is convened by the EPA. In 2021, the partnership continued to expand with more engagement by our nonprofit and community-based organizations across the corridor. So it started to grow beyond just these public sector partners. We started to see more grant funding come into the corridor specific to this overarching notion of a Rio Reimagined initiative at a regional scale for projects along the river corridor. And in 2023, this past year, we entered a new phase for the initiative, which we'll talk a little bit more about. And that sort of engaged expanded professional staff capacity for the initiative, a multi-organizational leadership structure that we'll talk a little bit about, and a more focused emphasis on bringing in federal funding for projects in the corridor. And I'm going to hand it over to Cindy now.
Thank you, Maggie. As Maggie mentioned, that designation that we received by the Urban Waters Federal Partnership really increased the interest at the federal level, both with regard to investment and support. As part of the Urban Waters Federal Partnership Program, this is really a partnership with about 15 federal agencies. As Maggie mentioned, it's convened by the EPA, but it is really supported by 15 federal agencies as well as over 28 national NGOs. So the intent here is to kind of streamline the processes, streamline communication and coordination so that these agencies know exactly how the partnership operates, how it operates at the local level at Rio, and how they can really support us. And then besides that, they also have funding programs. So besides the typical funding programs that we're looking at, there is funding set aside specifically for urban waters activities that are directly related to the partnership itself. And by way of example would be the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And that's important because not only do they draw on those federal dollars, but they're also kind of a national program that can bring in private investment, foundational support, and that allows us to compete as Rio for some of those funds. So we are able to connect with organizations such as this one, who partner again with those private companies, government agencies, and conservation organizations that they're looking to see to bring in a measurable impact on the environment and who offer funding opportunities to those priority watersheds. And with our designation, Rio does become one of those priority watersheds. And this is what we look like on the map. There are 21 urban waters locations. We were the 20th. And we receive funding specifically allocated to the urban waters locations. Again, we also benefit from that streamlined assistance among federal agencies and a national network learning opportunity of our peers. So we've got colleagues all over the country, and we've really been able to learn from them. We all approach things a little bit differently, but when we're working through issues, we kind of have this network where we can call and reach out to see how are they approaching it, what are some of the resources that have been successful to them, and then we are able to apply that to the work we're doing here. The program also supports an ambassador, and as Maggie mentioned, it's the role that I've been serving in for the past year. Each one of these urban waters location does have an ambassador. Their role is different, and it really is reflective of what the issues are at their urban waters location. At this particular location, my focus, based on an intergovernmental agreement, is really to bring in that additional federal funding. So connect with the Urban Waters Federal Partnership, those 15 federal agencies, but also to look at what are those other federal funding opportunities. And so it's very focused not just on Buckeye, but Buckeye as part of that Rio Reimagined corridor so that we can kind of take a look at what the priorities are for Buckeye, how do we kind of take a look at that in both a sub-regional and regional context. And all of that really is to position ourselves to compete well in the federal space. And so in that vein, in that premise, I continue to look for those federal grant opportunities and again work with folks to identify what your priorities are in context of those larger corridor-wide opportunities. And so with regard to my role, to share with you, just talk a little bit about my connection with not just the Urban Waters Federal Partnership, but also the Rio Reimagined Partnership. I do kind of break down my role into two buckets, if you will. On the one hand, I do connect to and collaborate with the Rio communities on a range of resources, including those federal grants in support of Rio Reimagined. And on the other hand, I do work directly with those federal agencies to really kind of build those relationships so they know not just what Rio Reimagined is and who we are, but what our funding priorities are. So should those pots of money become available, that Rio, kind of floats to the top of their mind. And so it's not just necessarily me searching for those opportunities, but our federal partners also reaching out to us to let us know that this funding is available as well. As I mentioned earlier, Buckeye is one of 10 funders of the ambassador position with representation on the advisory group. And I'm sure most of you know Bart Wingard, but he is a representative on our advisory group. And Buckeye has been really supportive of the position and participation in the advisory group itself. So what the advisory group really does is beyond providing oversight for my position, what we're really doing is working together to set priorities for my work in context of that larger corridor, the larger Rio corridor. So, and I'm also part of the core operating team that includes Maggie and her colleague Cece at ASU, MAG and GPL. Together, we're working together to pursue a vision plan and so that we have a strategic plan for a sustainable future for Rio. And so while a lot of that energy is put into that regional plan, I'm also working with the city to identify what I like to think of as short-term successes, right? We know that we want to build a sustainable future, but what are some of those short-term successes? And in my conversations with Buckeye, a couple of things floated to the top that was really consistent with all of the other Rio communities, and that was the interest in addressing invasive species and also building up recreational opportunities. So for example, we're meeting with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to put together a proposal for a planning initiative to address salt cedar mitigation. This will allow us to pursue funding for specific projects. And that's kind of one of the things we've been working on, is like this overarching strategy that we can plug in your individual projects so that we can make the case to fund those, again, at that larger scale. And in addition to that, we're always working with you to identify needs along the river corridor, develop those project coalitions, which are super important to funders, apply for the grant funding itself, and to continue to build a peer network to share those resources and expertise so that we can see what's working elsewhere and try to apply it to the work that we're doing here. So switching topics just a little bit, I just want to
Can I just interrupt you for a second there? Are there, speaking of funding opportunities, are there major funding opportunities that we've received? I'm trying to think of one specific to Buckeye. I can't recall one that's part of all of what you guys are working on, but across the entire corridor, or are we still early in that process of trying to identify and go after those?
Yeah. I mean, so one of the funding, this is not specific to Buckeye, but we did receive $1.7 million from the EPA for a brownfield grant for a coalition of 3 of the Rio cities, including Avondale, Phoenix, and Tempe. I'm blanking on what year that came in. I think they're wrapping that work up now. So there have been some coalition grants, but in terms of the entire regional scale, there has not been one giant bucket of funding that's come in since Cindy has started. But what we're working on, and we'll speak more to in a little while, is the overarching vision planning process to really serve as our strategic path forward for identifying those types of projects. Because to date, the work has really been on this, local scale or sub-regional scale.
Yeah, and I think one thing I'd like to add too, we really do need that strategic plan, but also in the beginning, I've identified potential funding opportunities and kind of convened a group to see if there was interest. And I think what we've learned is, obviously we need to build coalitions. Our community, there are all different types of applicants. So I think there was a big opportunity, the EPA's Community Challenge Grant, in which I send out kind of a funding hot sheet to let everyone know that there was this opportunity. The applicants needed to be community-based organizations. It was a very complex process. And what we did end up doing is kind of build a coalition such that on behalf of Rio Reimagined, or connected to Rio Reimagined, we did get a community-based organization that has just submitted a grant for an application through EPA's Community Change Grant. So they really just submitted it last week, so it's a TBD on that. But also last April, we started to look into the America the Beautiful Challenge Grant to address invasive species. And while we really didn't have the ability to put together an application for that, what we did end up doing was building a really nice group, a really nice coalition of which Buckeye was part of. And the outgrowth of that, or the outcome of that, is really connecting with the Army Corps of Engineers to work on that planning study for us on our behalf, in which they would entirely fund the project as long as they had the support coming from us. So, again, these things do take time to unfold, but in the last year, I think just kind of listening and learning and talking about what we really feel we can all kind of invest in together, those opportunities are out there, and we're now starting to make those connections. Sometimes it's a grant, and sometimes it's those 15 federal agencies. It's part of their urban waters activities that now they are starting to reach out to us. So I think it's starting to pay dividends.
Great, thank you.
Were there any other questions? Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about how supportive our Arizona delegation has been in terms of our success to date. Maggie mentioned the late Congressman Ed Pastor, but more recently, Senator Sinema supported an increased appropriation to support Rio. In addition to that, she also sponsored drought relief legislation to address invasive plant species in our waterways. We also had unanimous support from our Arizona delegation for the designation as an urban waters location, and that was really significant for us. Senators Sinema and Kelly have also co-sponsored legislation, not just in support of Rio Reimagined, but of the entire program of the Urban Waters Federal Partnership, and that is really significant, not just because it has the ability to support Rio, but it's even just bigger than that, by really being able to build and sustain the program at a national level that really does have the opportunity to pay dividends back for us in terms of the impacts it would bring for grants assistance and their continued ambassador support. So with that, I think we'll hand it back over to Maggie.
So some of the successes to date for the Rio initiative on a local level and sort of sub-regional level in terms of local plans and projects and activities. There's been a lot going on over the last 6 years in terms of funding and capacity building. We've received over $30 million in grant funding to Rio partners across the corridor, specifically leveraging the Rio Reimagined brand as a regional initiative. We've seen in the last election cycle, not just the most recent one, but one prior, municipal bond investments focused on river redevelopment and trail connectivity, particularly in Goodyear and Phoenix. And there's been a lot of expanded municipal emphasis on Rio Reimagined and bringing in new staff, specifically to support projects related to the river corridor. There's been a lot of municipal and tribal planning work that's been done. The El Rio Watercourse Master Plan and the El Rio Design Guidelines, of course, that we've already talked about. The City of Avondale's general plan identified a Gila River Scenic District. The City of Phoenix has just recently kicked off planning efforts for their 20-mile stretch of the Rio Salado. It's their community planning sort of visioning work to reimagine their stretch of the Rio. So a lot of renewed emphasis in terms of planning work. Trails and greenway connectivity and active recreation has been a really big focus. Maricopa County in the last year and a half approved the Parks Vision 2030 plan, which identifies a trail connection across the entire Rio 55-mile Rio Reimagined corridor. The City of Phoenix 30-way bridge project was a $25 million DOT grant that came in a number of years ago. I mentioned the Brownfield Assessment and Cleanup Grant from the EPA, which was a coalition grant between the three cities, Avondale, Phoenix, and Tempe. There's been also a lot of work in ecosystem restoration and planting projects with the City of Phoenix Rio Salado Oeste ecosystem restoration project. The Estrella Mountain Regional Park Pollinator Garden done right near here by the county, and a lot of invasive species removal projects here in the West Valley communities through the work of the Lower Gila River Collaborative, which will be discussed in more detail. As well as a lot of outreach events and activities down by the river, including a lot of Earth Day celebrations with our partners and just bringing people to the river to experience what the river has to offer. A lot of what we do as well and what we've done over the last 6 years is, again, bringing people to the river, connecting volunteers and our partners across the corridor to do plantings of the Estrella Mountain Regional Park Pollinator Garden. A lot of those plantings happen through volunteer efforts. Tree plantings at public schools has been a really big project area of emphasis. River cleanups, trash removal, and trail development projects, and supporting all the work that our partners do on the ground. At a regional scale, a lot of the successes to date are listed here. As I mentioned, ASU has been convening the Rio Reimagined Partnership bi-monthly for the last 6 years. We have the Urban Waters Federal Partnership Program designation that Cindy spoke to, which is really our connection to federal grants, technical assistance, and a network of partners across the U.S. Obviously, Cindy's position as our full-time Rio professional dedicated to identifying those federal funds for regional projects, and the approval of the federal local co-share funding model that funds Cindy's position, which includes contributions from City of Buckeye, as well as ASU and others. ASU has taken the lead on centralizing communications for the initiative. We've really served as the operations center for the last 6 years, including hosting the website. We produce a quarterly newsletter and supporting the work of our partners and amplifying their work out in the community. Another significant success is the Maricopa Association of Governments Active Transportation Plan for RIO Reimagined, which they just received approval for their consultant selection to lead this work over the next 18 months. Their executive committee approved that selection yesterday. This is significant because it's the first real regional scale project for RIO Reimagined. Everything else has been either sub-regional, coalition-based, or very localized. But this will be the first real regional scale study looking at the RIO Reimagined study area specifically, looking at trail connectivity, and active transportation refers to bike and pedestrian infrastructure. And then lastly here, the Greater Phoenix Leadership is forming a new 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to RIO Reimagined, which some of you may have heard of in the past. Many other urban river revitalization initiatives across the U.S. has included as part of their organizational and governance structure some sort of social impact organization and development arm. And so Greater Phoenix Leadership has, for a number of years, really been involved with RIO and have an interest in furthering the goals of the initiative and supporting it in this way by sort of incubating a new nonprofit that would help to execute the work of the initiative in the future. And Greater Phoenix Leadership is currently in the process of establishing the founding board for that organization, and is working on securing consultant support to help that board sort of set itself up for success and identify its mission, vision, and goals. So Cindy also mentioned, and I mentioned, this multi-organizational leadership team, this core operations team, as we're referring to this group. For many years, it was really just ASU sort of leading the charge in terms of convening all of the partners across the 55 miles and being this operations center for the initiative. But in the last year, we've really expanded to include Cindy's role as the ambassador to Urban Waters, the role of Maricopa Association of Governments as our regional planning entity and the work that they're going to be doing for active transportation planning, and Greater Phoenix Leadership in standing up this new C3. And so with all of the expanded capacity, the strong partnerships, the community and political support, both locally, statewide, and at the federal level, there's a lot of momentum for the initiative that needs to be channeled. And so today, many projects are going on within the corridor as we've described to you. And LGRC, the Lower Gila River Collaborative, has just recently completed a strategic plan for the work in the West Valley, related to restoration work in the Lower Gila. But there's no uniting framework or overarching plan at a regional scale at this point to say, what is RIO Reimagined? RIO Reimagined to date has really been this sort of conglomeration of things, as we've been describing to you today. And so we're working as this core operations team to really define the governance structure necessary to move the initiative into this new sort of planning phase, as we're calling it. And so there is no regional plan at this point, but a regional plan can help us to achieve the outcomes and benefits that you see here, ensuring meaningful community engagement and competitiveness for funding at a regional scale. It will help us to leverage momentum of that local interest and amplify it for maximum impact in terms of funding opportunities. A regional scale plan can help us to connect and expand the impact of all of these various projects that have gone on across the corridor and are continuing to be conceptualized. A regional scale plan can help us to identify and implement new regional scale projects and create a regional sense of place and identity for the river corridor at scale, as well as align diverse priorities across 55 miles. And so, a plan like this can really help us to build upon existing planning that's been done over the years. A regional scale vision plan, as we're describing, would it be sort of a very high-level vision for the corridor? It may include specific project priorities, would involve community engagement and community input across the 55-mile corridor, looking at the roles and relationships of the various organizations and communities across the river in terms of implementation and funding strategies, But a plan like this would not include mandates or regulations or requirements for local communities. Every community has their own local land use authority, and so, any projects that make their way into a regional scale plan such as this would be those that are supported by the community's elected leaders. So at the end of June, this past June in 2024, elected leaders from the communities within the Rio study area met at the Maricopa Association of Governments to discuss the benefits of a regional vision planning process for Rio Reimagined, as I outlined, and Mayor Orsborn was present at that meeting. And it was at that time that the leaders supported the concept of an early scoping phase to evaluate and connect existing planning and community engagement along the river corridor and design an inclusive vision planning process informed by the communities along the river. And so our next steps are to engage in a consultant-led process to bring the Rio Reimagined communities together in designing that process and really building on the existing plans, the existing projects, and existing community engagement that's been done across the river corridor. The consultant that is brought on board will be very informed of the work of the Lower Gila River Collaborative and the previous planning work in Buckeye and help to build off of those investments and plans. So the last slide here, I just wanted to highlight the priority areas for the initiative at large into these sort of buckets. When we're looking ahead at the next several years at least, we're really looking at urban planning is one significant bucket. We have the regional vision planning process that we will be kicking off here in the new year, which will build upon the work that we just described. And scoping that process will take us through probably the spring of 2025. Also in the urban planning bucket, we have the active transportation planning study that MAG will be kicking off in the new year, and that will run about 18 months. In orange is our bucket for federal funding. That's the work that Cindy's described. And she is looking not only at helping to find funding opportunities related to the vision planning process and any projects sort of coming out of that effort, but also for specific project priorities at each of the communities, such as Buckeye that she described earlier. So that's ongoing work. The initiative operations in purple is what ASU has done for the last 6 years and we continue to do. Really, ASU has provided pro bono professional staff services to support the initiative and doing a lot of the tasks that you see here, convening the partnership, the communications, the programming, advocacy, engaging our corporate partners. We'll continue to do that in the next several years. The 501c3 for Rio that Greater Phoenix leadership is starting up, that work is continuing as we discussed. And then in green, the Lower Gila River Collaborative. This is a forum for collaboration and coordination here in the West Valley. And as we've said, it really functions as the western reach of the Rio Reimagined initiative as a sub-regional collaborative. I'm going to turn it back to Adam.
Yep. All right, so who's getting excited? Yeah? Okay. We're going to have a test at the end we're going to pass around. Just make sure you guys take the notes. All right. I'll jump a little bit into our West Valley effort, Lower Gila River Collaborative. It's amazing. I know many of you have been involved in the river project over the years. It was, I think, a few of you in a room for many years trying to get partners and stakeholders involved. It was very difficult. And then I started in 2012, and it was just kind of just a small group of folks in Buckeye just doing our best to try to get the momentum going. And with former Senator McCain and Mayor Mack and council that's here today, it's just amazing to see all these partners coming together, take on a life of its own. And then you can see with all the work that's done, you can't just do it by one or two people. It takes a whole community to be able to leverage all of our resources in order to make things happen. So just amazing to see how much has been done. So the Lower Gila River Collaborative is actually something our West Valley started before even the Rio Reimagined project. We organized ourselves and formed a collaborative that includes a leadership council. And the leadership council is mayors representing other communities or leaders in other organizations that are decision-making bodies. The leadership council blesses many of the plans that we do as a coordinating team. Our coordinating team is facilitated by a consultant that we actually share costs on. So before we had a lot of our Buckeye resources and staff resources, we had to do a lot of work on our own. So all the communities, those funding communities that you see there on the slide, they all participated in shared funding to help support consultants to help us navigate this project. So that's our coordinating team, includes the senior level staff from many communities. And as we started to have those conversations about the West Valley, the El Rio plan that started many years ago, many of these subgroups broke off that you see in the green. Habitat enhancement, recreation, economic development, Dave's been in some of those meetings, outreach and engagement, our PIO and other cities' PIOs get involved. So it's really organized our effort in the West Valley from just kind of having a lot of meetings over the years. We're now very well organized as we move forward with our initiatives in each community. The collaborative, similar to some of the elements in the Rio Reimagine, our overall goals is to enhance, support, and connect and mitigate the elements within the river corridor. Water sources, adequate quality, water quality in the area is highly important. Ecological functions, habitat, connectivity, many of those you've heard from Cindy a little bit ago. The strategic action plan that she mentioned, it's great to have a lot of these plans on a map, but how do you actually move forward with the project, right? And so as part of this action plan, we've established it over the next 5 years. So every 5 years, we're going to update the action plan. And this is, again, the West Valley communities with all the partnership and support we have from the Rio Reimagine Group. Those are focused around map-based priorities and more importantly, implementation strategies to actually move forward with some of these initiatives. Also, what resources and tools do we need over the next 5 years to be able to accomplish these? I could tell you I've been in so many meetings where there's so many iologists in the room and every acronym you can think of, and it's just amazing how much education and support there are when we need some help with something. It's great. You can see Bart's head poking up above over there, so that's official that he actually attended that meeting.
He's hidden there. Is that on purpose?
He's hidden there. Yeah, it was a test.
On purpose?
On purpose, probably. Yeah. He's retiring soon, so he probably just wanted to kind of slowly back out, right? So, but in any event, so this is kind of probably the wow factor of the slide, at least in my opinion. This is primarily within our general planning area. So majority of the Lower Gila River Collaborative efforts are in our Buckeye planning area. There's over 70 projects that are actually going on in the river. And many of you, when you drive by, you don't see those. But many of them are either programs or there's game and fish going out there doing bird surveys and studying areas. One example is the Hidden Lake. When they started cleaning that area up, all the birds started coming back, and then Game and Fish was super excited, and they were out there monitoring. We also have several projects, we call them the turquoise beads. There's many projects that are under restoration. It's hard to see it from when you drive by, but they're similar pictures that you saw earlier. There's folks out there restoring the river in increments, but there's a lot of paperwork and process, even if you have to do 40 acres, 20 acres. It takes a lot of effort and collaboration to do that. But I just wanted to show you here these different reaches of how much is going on. We have a website dedicated to this as well. I could share with you afterwards. I can forward to you guys so you can kind of click on them and learn more information about what's going on. But this overall shows, at least in the West Valley, a lot of the different progress that's been made. Some accomplishments for the Lower Gila River Group, and again, much of our support also comes from the Rio Reimagine Group. They've been a great resource to help accomplish some of these things. But in 2023, 212 acres of non-native vegetation has been managed, 203 acres seeded with native vegetation, 1,670 native plants and trees were planted in 2023, 424,000 was spent through contract work, habitat enhancement, and just 275 volunteers is excellent, bringing as much of the community out there to help and volunteer as possible. And then over, within the West Valley region, 4,600 folks have attended different river events along the way. This is a picture. This is in Estrella, but this picture shows this is very, very similar to what you see in all restoration projects. You'll see a clearing, and they're called tall pot plants. You'll see folks drilling holes, mechanical removal. But these little pilot projects, again, you can't see it from the street. But if you're, I think some of you have been on a tour that's seen some of these, but a lot of these little pocket restoration projects are happening along the corridor, and I think it's gaining momentum. Some takeaways for Buckeye. There's so much education and learning that we have from our partners. With best practices. What did you do that you wanted to do different? So if we're restoring a site, we learn from them. What did you guys do that you lost money on the project? What should we be sensitive to? Should we be doing soil sampling? So we're learning a lot and saving some funds as we do different things. Funding and implementation, along with our invasive projects. There's even drone monitoring that's going on. And I can talk to you probably for half an hour about that later if you're interested. Let me know, but we can talk about how that technology works. It's really cool. And also the takeaways for Buckeye is amplifying our current and potential river amenities. So like, for instance, as we start to restore these sites and we start to create some of these areas of interest, how do we start to engage the public and start to celebrate some of these wins? What's next, at least for the collaborative as well as the arm of the Rio group, is access to the river. How do we get to the public out there? Trails, the Buckeye 40 acres that Bob and Willie are going to talk about a little bit later to try to get a little more implementation, excitement moving forward. As well as we're launching our general plan update in the next couple of years, so that'll be a really robust process citywide where we'll talk a lot about the Gila River and obtain community feedback as well. So again, this is just a quick snapshot of our the Lower Gila River, it's a tongue twister, collaborative group on partners that are working with us on that project. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Willie to talk a little bit about their involvement with our Buckeye 40-acre project site.
Yeah, good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. Willie Summers with the Department of Forestry and Fire Management. Just to set the stage a little bit about what I'm going to talk about. In part, what we're going to talk about is what happens after you remove salt cedar from the Lower Gila River. What are some of the next steps and next considerations that are important? And what we're also going to talk about is the value of pilot sites, pilot project sites. There's a handful of pilot sites along the Lower Gila River. Buckeye 40 is one of them. And they've been really valuable in learning from the work of others and seeing how this restoration work that happens holds up over time, over a period of, what happens 10, 15 years later. So we have some of these sites to learn from, and but this one, Buckeye 40, we're going to talk more about. And lastly, just to set the stage, the Department of Forestry and Fire Management received a $5 million appropriation from the state legislature in 2022, July 1, 2022. And we've been using those funds to implement projects. But this project here I'm going to talk about was our very first effort and very first expenditure of that $5 million fund. So what this Buckeye 40 project is a partnership between the City of Buckeye and the Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management. Bob, I think you took this picture, thank you, when we were out there taking a look. And what we're doing is learning how to stabilize land after the clearing and removing of salt cedar, which is what happened on this 40-acre site. Just some background to set the stage, but salt cedar was mechanically cleared from the entire site in 2016, and the City of Buckeye got a $227,000 grant from the state. And I think that was with the state, or excuse me, the Buckeye Fire District. The fire department received that grant. And what they did was really interesting. They had the salt cedar debris incinerated with an air curtain burner. The only time I've seen that in the Lower Gila, actually. It was a novel way of getting rid of all this material. There was an interest in burning the material, but there was a lot of dirt also in the material, so that was a novel way of taking care of the slash, basically. And then what the city did is they followed up with an herbicide application in the fall of 2017 across the entire site to control and prevent salt cedar regrowth. So that was a good step. But to point out, revegetation of the site did not occur. Stink nut is a plant you may have heard of. It's a highly invasive, noxious weed. And in December of 2022, we started noticing stink nut really coming on board on this site here. It was added to the state noxious weed list in 2019, and it spread all across Maricopa County. Seeing what was happening on this site, it was decided that we were going to control the stink nut before it flowered and went to seed. So really just try to quickly act on what we were seeing on the ground. So the following slides, we're going to talk about our stink nut mitigation and reseeding work at Buckeye 40, basically the last 2 years, what we've done and what we've learned. So this is what the site looked like. This is a problem, especially for someone in my profession. This is a major invasive plant infestation, and In January 2023, when this photo was taken, the entire site was covered in stink net. It looks kind of nice. It looks like alfalfa, one could say, but that's not a proper alfalfa, proper stink net. And this plant's highly invasive, and it doesn't have any wildlife value, the pollinators or really anything else. It's from South Africa. It came into Southern California and Arizona. Really started taking off in 2019. So it's been an interesting challenge to manage. So I'll walk you through what we did briefly. So herbicide application. So step one was DFFM. We hired a contractor, made the first application early 2023, the perimeter of the site. And winter weather conditions that month really delayed the second herbicide application for the interior of the site. That gave the contractor some time to come up with a different formulation. And that second treatment was made in March of the same year. And really what we've learned and seen from treating this plant is the best time to spray stink net is typically in early to mid-February, but that can depend, each year is different with the winter rains that we have. And I should mention, of course, that we work with the city of Buckeye, getting permits and permissions to do this work and as part of the partnership. So step two, basically the summer passed and there was a lot of standing, dead, dry vegetation out there, a fire hazard. So DFFM, we used a forestry crew and they were tasked with clearing all the dead and dry stink net from the site. So with lots of labor on the ground and lots of man hours, they raked, piled, and hauled the stink net debris off just in some roll-off dumpsters that were provided by the city of Buckeye. And that project was completed in November, and so the site was cleared out and ready for reseeding, which was the next step in the process here. And one kudos to Buckeye, we coordinated and you all applied a pre-emergent herbicide for a 6-acre portion of the site. That was timed perfectly and worked really well, actually, to keep stink net under control. So this is a map of the 40-acre site, and we broke this into 6 treatment areas. I'm just going to show you 3 of them because they're focused on reseeding. So we reseeded with 4-winged saltbush, which is a really common shrub out there on the lower Gila. An excellent native plant. We also reseeded with a custom seed mix that we came up with. That's the purple area in the upper right corner. And we used mulch in concert with seeding to test how that would work. And then lastly, we used a custom seed mix without mulch on the bottom left there and wanted to compare the two. So results from reseeding, very limited establishment due to drought conditions, just not much rain, very consistent, kind of story lately. And there was no native plant establishment in the plot without mulch. So mulch did help with establishing native plant species. And we've seen this over on one of the other pilot sites of the flood control district, right along the 85 bridge. They left a lot of salt cedar mulch, woody material, and they had very little weeds and good establishment of native plants. So there's something to be said there. Just to show you a little bit of what we got established though on your property, Buckeye 40. The upper left is brittle bush, native plant that was reseeded, desert marigold in the middle, and then some 4-winged saltbush on the right established. You can see the mulch. We added a little bit of mulch around these plants to give them a helping hand. And I may have gone out there a few times with a watering can and then some supplemental watering too to help them out. So just to summarize, our components of this project were first step herbicide treatment. So you can see that on the left there. The brown material was treated. That was that perimeter herbicide treatment, and that browned out and killed the stink net before it went to seed. And then the treatment part that's yellow, those plants were starting to flower. That window, the timing window was a little bit off because of weather. And then in the middle, you can see the serious amount of biomass that we removed and put in those roll-off dumpsters and hauled away. We didn't track how many tons or anything like that, but I mean, it was multiple loads of of those roll-off dumpsters going to the landfill. And then lastly, we did some reseeding work, so that's one of our forestry crew coordinators with a push seeder there, reseeding the site. So just some takeaways, following the removal of invasive species, whether it's salt cedar or stink net, revegetation is essential to stabilize the site. But it's also challenging in this environment, and you have to do repeat reseeding, especially when you have drought conditions like we've been in. Of course, stink net at this scale, 40 acres, is best controlled by a timely herbicide application, and you've got to get that timing right. In addition, a mulch has been shown to assist native vegetation establishment and keep stink net in check. So we're going to take these lessons that we've learned and apply them to some project sites that we have planned in this area next treatment season. So just some next steps. This is my final slide, but there is an ASU PhD student that is talking with City of Buckeye staff about a project to test mulch on Buckeye 40 and evaluate the results. So that's something exciting, and we're helping that student with some of the materials that she'll need. And then we're looking to do some mechanical clearing of salt cedar reseeding both west and south of Buckeye 40. A total of 680 acres are planned for treatment over the next 2 years. So that land in purple is Arizona Game and Fish owned land, and we'll work with them on clearing that salt cedar mechanically. And then the property in green is Fish and Wildlife Service owned land, and we'll also work on that property and clear that. And then the middle parcel is private land to the west of Buckeye 40, but I believe is going to change hands. So that project may take a different turn. But this is what we're looking at doing, and taking the lessons of Buckeye 40 and putting them into play, and really making sure that we try to reseed these areas and get native vegetation established as quickly as possible, and also recognize that we might have to do it multiple times.
Could I ask a question on the stink net? And does that just grow in open areas, or does that intertwine with the salt cedars and create an even more combustible?
Unfortunately, both.
Is that right?
Yeah, it'll open cleared areas, and it'll grow in between salt cedars. We've seen that as well. So it'll occupy disturbed ground, right? Any area that's open and disturbed, it'll set up. And so, yeah, it's going to be a real active. It's going to be something we really need to be cognizant of when we're moving salt cedar, of what's going to come next, and recognizing that there could be this big influx of an invasive plant like stink net. If the weather conditions line up, and if we don't have the site, fully revegetated yet, we're going to need to it's just a balance that we need to strike. But yeah, we learned a lot from this Buckeye 40 project, and these conditions were just incredible that produced all that growth.
Well, good evening, Mayor, Council. Bob Weisner, Deputy Director in the Community Services Department. So we'll really talk more about the short-term plans for the Buckeye 40-acre parcel. I'm going to talk more about the ultimate plans for that parcel. So I think most of you know that 40-acre parcel is located at the terminus of Miller Road. And we see a lot of potential with this site. There's a lot of synergies with some other recreational resources in the river, thinking about the Buckeye Equestrian Center located to the north of the parcel, but also Hidden Lake to the east. So back in 2016, Avondale, Goodyear, the Flood Control District of Maricopa County, and Maricopa County Planning and Development came together to prepare the El Rio Design Guidelines and Planning Standards. And this really looked at how development would interface with the river. And as part of that study, each of the cities determined a pilot project. So in Avondale, their pilot project was a renovation to their Festival Fields Park. In Goodyear, it was an expansion of a trailhead located at Vineyard and Bullard Wash. And then for Buckeye, our pilot project was the 40-acre parcel. So this is the conceptual site plan of what we were evaluating for that parcel. So looking at a trailhead with parking for vehicles, but also equestrian parking. We also looked at areas for families to come in and picnic. We also looked at opportunities for environmental education. So as you can see, In the exhibit, there's a wetland demonstration pond on the envisioned for the property. And of course, trails throughout the parcel, but also that would connect to others that are envisioned. So there's really not much good for a trailhead if you don't have any trails. And so we also worked with a consultant to put together a trails plan along the Gila River. And this trail plan really looked at opportunities for existing structures or planned structures that would be located near or adjacent to the river. So for example, there's a planned levee located on the north side of the Gila River that was a joint study back in 2017 between the Flood Control District of Maricopa County and the city of Buckeye. And that levee would help take the 7th Street wastewater treatment plant out of the floodplain. So we evaluated that as an option to use that levee as another linear corridor to place a trail adjacent to it. But knowing that that's probably further out, we also looked at opportunities as an interim condition to use the South Extension Canal for the Buckeye Water Conservation and Drainage District. Along with that, we also looked at not only trails on the north side of the Gila River in the south, but also a 4-foot earthen trail within the river corridor itself that would get you closer to the actual water that's in the river. And those are just some concepts looking on the left of what that could look like with the trail on the north side, but also the 4-foot earthen trail within the river itself. Some of our next steps for the 40-acre parcel specifically is looking at annexation. This parcel has not been annexed into the city proper, so it's something that we're going to be working on over the next year. And also right-of-way. We know that there's right-of-way restrictions to get access to this parcel, so we're going to be working with our partners in development services and transportation to get access to this parcel. We'll also continue to work with the capital improvement program and city leadership for its inclusion into the capital improvement plan. So we'll continue to evaluate that as well. So, in today's presentation, we've talked to you about the whole macro scale, the 55 miles of Rio Reimagined, then we've got it down to 20 miles for the Lower Gila River Collaborative, and then down to a 40-acre specific site in the Gila River. And I think what we've learned is that it's not one entity alone that can achieve this vision, that it's all of us working collaboratively. But I think the work that Rio Reimagined and ASU and all the other partners have really leveraged the resources that we need to continue making progress on restoration, salt cedar remediation, recreation, and really making the Gila River in Buckeye and throughout the West Valley and the Valley in general a resource that we can be proud of. So with that, we're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
We'll go questions from council. Councilmember Guy.
I was so excited that this was going to be my final workshop. I thought, okay, cool. And I think I'm still excited after the last slides, but when did you start with the city?
Started in 2008.
Okay, so already, probably 2005, because I remember my parting words to you were, Bob, do not let this die. But I'm going to be dead before that ever happens. So it's frustrating to me that, you think of something that was early 2000s, 25 years later, and here we are. And I realize that it's complicated, but I wonder if we added up all the costs of the plans that we have done for the last 25 years. I bet that's a staggering amount. So sometimes it seems it's fabulous we have all these partners, but man, we have all these partners. So how do you get a straight path to accomplishing something? And bottom line, until somebody eradicates the salt cedars out of there, we can all do these individual projects all we want. But basically, someone has to say we're going to get rid of all of them so that we can all start doing the mitigation efforts for our individual partners. And I don't know what act of God has to occur for someone to finally say, they need to be eradicated from the river. So anyway, I'm excited. I appreciate that it hasn't died. I mean, but if you visit any city, whether it's a more rural approach, say Boise, Idaho, or a more Tempe Town Lake approach, there's no city that doesn't have value from a waterway going through it. And as Buckeye's growing and we're doing our downtown redevelopment, when I've been talking to some developers, I'm like, but you know this is going to be this, and you know this is going to be this, because I don't necessarily want a 400-unit apartment building at the gateway. But it's hard for them to go on when you've been planning this for 25 years, when is this actually going to occur? So scattered thoughts, I know, but I hope we can proceed with at least our 40 acres would be a start.
Councilmember, we basically took all the plans that you had before and just threw them away.
I know.
The plans from now on. But thank you.
Couple questions. So you mentioned the levee. Did we make any strides on that at all? Or is that going to be a Buckeye project separate from this? Or how does that work?
If I can explain that. You want to talk about that? No. So the levee was kind of two-part. So the Flood Control District and Buckeye partnered in that study. And the reason for the study was the direction at the time was to take something to the Capitol. When the council met with the Capitol to ask for large-scale funding to assist in the flood mitigation, as well as salt cedar removal. So what that does is a two-parter. So it moved forward, and there was some momentum with the levee project that helped some funding towards the protection of the wastewater treatment plant. But the second part of it is also there was a lot of engineering done and a lot of good information done that we have on record. That development, there's been several PACs along the river corridor that they're utilizing that information to identify where they could mitigate the flood issues on their properties. So the two-parter, unfortunately, through the Corps, the cost was like $400 million. And so our competitiveness in the West Valley compared to the rest of the United States, like a Katrina or New Orleans, we just couldn't meet on the competitive side to get that massive level of funding. So that plan, that levee project is still in place, and we send it to quite a few of these projects that are proposing to go along the river. But we haven't gained a lot of large momentum or a large-scale support and funding from the federal government because it's the prioritization that's been the issue to actually move forward with construction.
Will there ever be a point that we revisit that conversation to see if there's just another way to solve this problem with the Army Corps?
Yeah, I think, and what's amazing about the Rio Reimagine component, we didn't have an urban waters partnership at that time, so we didn't have 10 to 12 different federal agencies at our fingertips. We had to do a lot of it on our own, kind of through the back channels. And Senator McCain was great in getting us at the table. They've come out and met with us. But I think the momentum now is even amplified with using the Rio Reimagine partnerships to continue that large-scale funding conversation. Because I could tell you, Goodyear, Avondale, flood control, they're all supportive of that concept. It's just a matter of getting that funding. It's been challenging over the last 5 to 8 years with the competitiveness.
Another question, you mentioned there was 3 projects that were piloted with each city. Now that some of those are done or nearing done, will you guys compare notes and then try and do another project, or what's the next step for that?
Yeah, so I know Avondale implemented their festival fields and made those improvements. And I actually looked at the aerial map for the trailhead expansion that was at Vineyard and Bullard, and they never completed that project. So I think as we continue to work with our partners in the West Valley cities, and especially with the study that's coming up through the Maricopa Association of Governments for the Active Transportation Plan, I think we can look at the previous work that we've done on our trail plan, which will dovetail perfectly into that active trail transportation plan, and make sure that there's alignment with both Goodyear and Avondale to make sure that there's that connectivity along the Gila River. So in theory, long term, you would be able to travel all the way from Buckeye all the way over to the Salt River Pima Indian community along this 55-mile stretch of trail, which I think would be really impressive. So we're going to continue that collaboration between the West Valley cities, but also for there's going to be this part of this regional study.
I think another part to that is sand and gravel operators are starting to look into the West Valley because a lot of the construction that's, we're the last step in the process in the metropolitan area for development. As those sand and gravel pits start to move forward, they're going to clear the salt cedar. We have our sand and gravel reclamation guidelines, and we have one that's going west of the 40 acres. They're exploring, we gave them a right of easement to go through and access their property. We think that those sand and gravel pits, from what we analyzed, there's probably going to be 40 to 50 little lakes that are going to be left over when they're done. And so we have some guidelines and tools that the council helped us adopt in 2016 that we can put it on the table to try to enter a partnership if we're interested in the recreational component of those. So we think probably even over the next 5 years, you're probably going to have some of those sand and gravel areas that are going to clear and start to mine. But long-term vision is those can be turned into an amenity. So you'll probably see that as well.
With some of our changes politically, Senator Sinema and McCain, do we foresee any funding changes, or do we feel like that will be pretty consistent moving forward with change in leadership? I'm not sure if that's an ASU question.
Yeah, I'll ask you guys for your perspective on the support on the funding side.
Well,
Get out your crystal ball.
Yeah, I was going to say, thank you, because I don't have a crystal ball. But the funding is both authorized and appropriated. And so we've been working primarily with the infrastructure law. The EPA Community Change Grant is under IRA. Those programs have been authorized through 2025 and 2026. But always we need an act of Congress to pass a budget and to fund those appropriations for those programs. And so this is not just me with a crystal ball, but with my rose-colored glasses, if you will. Indulge me. I think, it's been a long time since we've had, the House and Senate kind of on the same page. There are so many infrastructure projects out there now, and I just don't see the downside of not funding infrastructure projects into the future. And I just hang my hat on that was a bipartisan infrastructure law. So they have the option, of course, letting it expire. They have the option of continuing it. They have the option of continuing to fund it or not fund it, But I am hopeful because, again, I feel that the emphasis on our infrastructure across the country has been well publicized, and I think we've all felt that. And we're very slowly starting to see these improvements on the ground, and I just think that, again, I feel it's winning. And that is really the source for us, those infrastructure bills, along with the funding, that's specifically dedicated to urban waters. It's a mystery to me where these federal agencies get those pockets of money to dedicate to those urban waters activities. But it's been my experience that those little pots exist everywhere all the time. And so I think our job is to really make sure that we maintain those relationships, because those are staff folks. They're not going to be the elected officials that are day in and day out working on this stuff. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, I think, is a really good example. They're out of the LA district. And I think as they've experienced staff changes, that they have expressed interest into being more present in Arizona. I think we could imagine anyone working out of LA, Arizona, it may not be so high on their priority list, but it is now. And it's because of their staff people. And so I feel it's also an opportunity kind of striking while the iron's hot too. And right now for the Corps, it's hot, and I think once we get them here and we start to talk about invasives, the levee project may come up. And I think, what we can do is also talk to them about what's a good strategy, like how do we get there? Because that's really the other benefit of tapping into this network, is just like, help us devise a strategy to get there, because we don't know how to do this. So, and I think that they've been very good. I mean, they've had a team of 6 or 8 people express interest continuously in working on drought resiliency in Arizona. And when we pitched the invasive species project, they were very, very excited about the opportunity.
We had our experience with the Corps over the last 10 years. They really want something to happen in Buckeye, but sometimes it's above them where policies change. Funding is very cyclical through the Corps too. Sometimes funding is available for big infrastructure. Anything over a certain amount has to go through congressional action, so that's even a bigger step. But on the environmental side, if you have big infrastructure, for safety, That's kind of the low-hanging fruit where there's a lot of funding available, but you have to prove and be competitive on the safety. How many homes are going to be flooded versus another area of the United States. But when the environmental side, there wasn't a lot of support to add funds to the environmental component of what's called the Continuing Authorities Program. It was run dry. We're keeping our finger on that pulse because when money's available in that aspect through the core, that's when we have a lot of momentum and competitiveness in our area because of the environmental impacts to the city. The safety impacts where the big money is, that's where we struggled to be competitive over the last 10 years.
Thank you so much for the work.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any other questions down this way?
I do. Go ahead. Willie, where do we know, actually, has there ever been a pinpoint of where the salt cedars actually came from, how they got into that river system, and do we know that?
Boy, I mean, they were introduced for erosion control, across the West, right? And so they were intentionally brought in for erosion control, to spread over, over the past century. And, but yeah, hard to pinpoint, the introduction into the lower Gila. I haven't read or heard much about that.
And by whom? Who would be that introduction? Who did that?
Yeah, I don't know the exact history myself. I know that, like the Soil Conservation Service back in the 1930s, they're looking for erosion control plants, after the Dust Bowl and things of that nature. But yeah, I don't have the history memorized very well about the introduction of salt cedar to the western U.S.
I think there was the federal government was involved in the 50s, 60s to introduce that for bank stabilization, but there was a thought at the time that it wouldn't expand as fast as it did. I think they were assuming over a 5-year period it would maybe expand to 1 kilometer, but it went 50 kilometers. And so there's been, since the 50s and 60s, there's been some lawsuits, from the Audubon Society with the federal government for introducing that into the system. And so that's why I think through this collaboration and our partners with the federal government, I think they have a stake in this historically on mitigating, but it's all across the southwestern United States. Many of the conferences we go to in Colorado, they're all struggling with this, but the Corps has been extremely helpful and at the table in those discussions to try to find the support because they have a little bit of a stake in it as well.
So how did those lawsuits end up?
I'm sorry?
You mentioned lawsuits.
I don't know how the Audubon ended up. That was do you guys remember that about 4 years ago? How that, but I could find out.
Was that about the Tamarisk leaf beetle?
Yeah,
program?
and then with the leaf beetle as well as the endangered species that were being impacted by that, the Southwest wolf like that, I think. But yeah, the beetle is a whole other thing. We can talk to you guys about it at a different time.
It just seems funny, like if any of us planted a plant in our backyard and it impacted our neighbors,
Yeah.
we would be expected to pay whatever damages were done and get it taken care of. It's just funny how, if that's the case, that's what happened, and why they're not just ponying up and being done with it.
Yeah.
I mean, if we can have a straight line back to where it was introduced. I don't understand that thought process. I mean, if it was big enough for the Audubon Society to bring a lawsuit and possibly win, if that's what it sounds like, or whatever happened with it. So that would be interesting to find out.
Yeah.
But it's something that has been on our docket since I've been involved. I've only been here since 16 on the council, that is. But I remember how it was. I mean, I've been a dozer pushing the Tamarisk over, protecting family farms and dairies and stuff from burning, from it being on fire, and also during the flood in 93, whenever they had all the pushback from Gillespie all the way through, and it's a problem, and it's only going to continue until we get it out. So that's all I have. Thank you.
All legal work that he was performing with the proper permits.
No, it's like, go ahead.
No, yeah. Don't say anything. Yeah. Your attorney next to you is advising you.
No pictures, can't prove nothing.
Just a couple things. If you could go back to the one slide that had fire on it and the issues and the opportunities.
Can we help you?
Might
Might be going a little back, but.
Can we go all the way back to the beginning?
Very good.
You okay?
Thumb is all right.
Yeah.
From the public safety aspect, and each one of those things is an impact on the community. I think the other thing that is not captured in this, and I didn't catch it in another slide, is the water that those salt cedars drink. And keeping that as one of the big items that we're talking about, specifically in the Buckeye area. There, yeah, so it was on there. I think it just continuing to highlight that and make sure that there's the fire aspect, there's the flood aspect, and the water conservation, and then economic development that goes along with all of that. And I think if we keep pounding on those drums, eventually the federal government or state or whoever it is will listen and engage a lot more than they have. And I really appreciate how you guys started from a macro level and then brought it down to our 40 acres and then opportunities outside of that. I noticed the ring was called the council ring. We'll have to talk about that. That means. That's where we gather. So all of that is really awesome stuff. And from a macro level, that 55 miles from out here to Grandview Dam, if we can execute on that and create that here, holy cow, what an amenity for the entire valley, really, and a connector all the way across. You mentioned the planning effort that will get underway. There's two costs that I'm kind of curious about, just to give some scale to what we're embarking on here. From a planning perspective across that entire area, and maybe it's planning plus design, is there a cost associated with that?
So, yes and no. So basically the way that we as a partnership are approaching the regional scale vision planning process is in 2 phases. The first phase, which we have an RFP closing on Friday to secure a consultant to lead the phase 1, which will take us from the new year through the end of May, is the scoping phase. And so that is a scoping process that will be conducted in connection with all the Rio communities to identify what exactly is it that we all collectively believe we should be looking at in terms of a regional vision plan, because to one of the points raised earlier, there's been a lot of planning work done. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. It's how do we take what's been done and stitch it together, identify the gaps, and then create these opportunities to say to funders, it's not just this trail plan for the city of Buckeye. It's a trail plan at scale, and it's worth investing in and telling that regional story. So the point I'm trying to make is the scoping process will identify what needs to be evaluated and included as part of the planning process, and that will give us a cost to develop the plan itself. Now, looking at other similar planning efforts in other places, we have a general sense of what it could be, but it will depend upon what the communities want to look at. So phase 2 would be a follow-on RFP to actually execute upon the scope of work that's developed in phase 1, and that would be, the timeline and cost would be identified in phase 1 scoping. So it could be, $1 million, could be $2 million, depending on what level of detail the Rio communities want to get into. Are we looking at developing specific projects, or are we looking more super high level and just kind of knitting things together? Okay. And then what the price tag to implement that plan would be is entirely dependent on what ends up in the plan.
Okay. Yeah, because some areas are going to be very built up and urban, like Tempe. Some of them in our areas hopefully going to be taking advantage of some of the mining that has gone on, and it's really connecting that with trails and getting rid of the salt cedars and putting in the natives plants and species out here.
So the city of Phoenix, we have about 4 minutes until we wrap up, but I won't talk too much. The city of Phoenix, when they first got involved with the Rio Reimagine, and we kind of tied all the groups together in the first meeting that we had, they were just really looking at the West Valley. How did you guys plan this out and coordinate between so we've done a lot that many are kind of using it as a guide. So we think, as she mentioned, it depends on the community and the section of how much effort they need to put into it. But ours, will probably be more of the stitching and not as much of the kind of the reinventing of the wheel that we've already done. That's probably what we anticipate, at least in our section.
Yeah.
So hopefully that helps a little bit in the, the global scale of the conversation. Phoenix will have to take out the checkbook probably a little more.
Copy stitching. Yeah, the last thing I want to say is just the more opportunity that we can create in activating our 40 acres and then slowly expanding that, and maybe it's Councilman Yonker on a dozer cutting a trail through there.
Whatever we need to do.
Whatever, yeah, he's okay.
Volunteers.
Permit or no permit. And creating these areas where people can go out and recreate and exposing folks to what we have, the opportunities that we have there. I heard Councilmember Guy talk about this.
You have to ask him.
I wasn't going to say that. I was going to say that one of the very first meetings that I had met her in may have been in this, or one of the buildings downtown here, where the conversation was about the white tanks, it was about El Rio, it was about all of these opportunities that we have out here. And the more we can get people out to see it and to engage in the recreation that's available, the more excited I think our communities will be about spending money on some of this stuff and making some pretty special stuff happen. And that's not just this area down here, it's the white tanks, it's the tied into the Hacienda and all the way up to the very northern stretches of our communities. So,
Can I add before we close that, there's one thing I failed to mention that's really important, is it's amazing, the partnerships, even though we made all these partnerships on the Gila River and all those folks that we've met over time from these higher level agencies, they have helped us with other projects in Buckeye, even beyond this. So we made partnerships to help us with wildlife corridors, we had some discussions about water resources, and those, so it's not just, you build those partnerships citywide, which has been a breath of fresh air to kind of meet all those folks.
One more thing, if I can, on something that's always been interesting to me on this thing, we deal with a lot of different projects, whether you talk about white tanks or all. This is one of those things, in my opinion, that there's a seat for everybody at the table, whether your interest is water conservation or if you want to have urban development or you have riparian area. There is an aspect to this overall project that affects everything. I can't think of a single thing where it wouldn't be a positive thing. Even if you want to go all the way as micro focus on the water savings, it would affect every household in the city and possibly help the entire region. So it's something that nobody can argue the fact that it's of its value in the whole community. So hopefully we keep going.
Cindy, Maggie, Willie, thank you very much. Bob and Adam, thank you for all your work on this, and keep doing great things. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, item number 3, there's nothing else on the agenda, so we are